Today, as part of our Institute Day, we're going to be taking a few minutes to talk about what blended learning is and what blended learning could look like for District 15. Blended learning is not a new concept. It was originally defined by Staker and Horn in 2012. Basically, they were thinking more of alternative ed programs, collegiate programs, and high school programs where they might have said something to the effect of blended learning is this formal education program where some activities are done digitally and some activities are done in person, where students have choice over the time, place, path, and/or pace of their learning. And at least part of the learning had to happen at a brick and mortar location away from home. So this is an antiquated learning of what blended learning is. And if you think back to what kind of educational technology we had in 2012, it's kind of interesting to think, to me at least, what blended learning might have looked like almost 10 years ago. So for our last e-learning day, we were very lucky to have Dr. Catelyn Tucker join us. And she is certainly an expert, maybe even the expert in the field on blended learning. And she's updated this original definition from her first book in 2017 as blended learning is the combination of active, engaged learning online combined with active, engaged learning offline to provide students with more control over the time, place, pace, and path of their learning. And I really think that this is an ideal that we should look to and really could probably be the best of what we've done in the last year so that we can move forward to think about how blended learning could look for students at our school. So like I said before, blended learning is not new. We definitely had some surprises during our e-learning day in March where people would say things like, these are not new concepts. These are things that we've heard about before, like things like workshop model and station rotation. You're right, this isn't a new concept. Blended learning is something that's been around for a while. And one of the neat things about blended learning is it looks at the best practices from in-person instruction and using the best practices from tech integration for the best outcome for students. So while this might be something that's new with our vocabulary, or maybe even as we went one-to-one with student devices a few years ago, blended learning is really language that's going to be part of all modern instruction as we move forward. And it's going to be part of our district language and schools all around the world as well. So blended learning isn't just for a certain grade level or age level of students. It's really for all teaching and learning environments. I know that sometimes when we talk about different learning or teaching strategies, we think specifically about the general ed classroom. But blended learning can really be applied across the board. As a former specials teacher, it's definitely something that I think about how I had students work digitally to record their playing or playing tests, or we record performances of compositions, etc. And blended learning is really something that can be in any classroom. So just keep that in mind, that this is not just for a special group of students, a gifted and talented classroom or a very small setting, like a push-in class or something like this. It's really for all teaching and learning environments, and you can scale it up or down. So if this is something you're thinking about how this could work for you, just remember that you can start small. You don't have to do everything right away. You can start to integrate small pieces of tech integration and blended learning into your instruction. We're going to take just a few minutes to watch a video from Dr. Tucker. Now, this is a really old video. It's from 2014, but it's at the beginning, right at the beginning of her writing her first book and explaining what blended learning looks like for her in her high school English classroom. Here in the presentation, I gave you a link to the slides here, which is a tiny URL link. If you want to go type this in, the next thing that I have for you is an article from Dr. Tucker to kind of put together what she was just talking about in the video, and then read her blog on what is the why, the how, and the what of blended learning. So go ahead and make sure you have that URL typed in. And then you'll be able to access the link for her blog post on the why, the how, and the what of blended learning. Just take a few minutes to read this. So one thing to think about after you've read that blog post and listened to Dr. Tucker in her own words talk about blended learning, we want to make sure we emphasize that blended learning is not just about using technology tools to teach and for students to learn. We have to start switching our mindset from substitution level activities. You might have heard of the SAMR model before, and the basic version of the SAMR model, the simplest level is substituting a paper pencil activity, for example, for something that's done digitally. So we need to start moving away from this idea of just substitution when we're using technology and thinking about more robust tech integration that's going to support collaboration between students and higher level thinking skills. We want kids to be able to dive deeper into content and be able to have some choice and amplify student agency and their voice in their choices of learning. And we know that this is challenging to do, but this is a key part of the philosophy of what blended learning is. So in the last year, we've been forced to become more flexible. We haven't had any choice. So how can we keep that mindset as we move forward? Right now, when we think about blended learning, I want you to consider all the effective instructional practices that have been applied into a traditional classroom, maybe what we've done in the past or what we've traditionally done here. And then I want you to think about effective instructional practices applied in distance learning, when we were fully remote, when we couldn't see our kids face to face. Blended learning is right there in the middle. How can we take all these practices and create a highly effective blended learning classroom? This is where we want to go when we're looking towards the future of instruction here at District 15. One additional benefit of blended learning that maybe you haven't thought about is cultural responsiveness. And I put a quote in here from one of my favorite books by Zaretta Hammond. And she talks specifically about, as a culturally responsive teacher, one of the things that we want to empower students to do is take over the reins of their own learning. So blended learning, remember, isn't just about technology integration. It's also about providing students some choice in the path of their learning and also in both the product and the process of what they're learning. So when we think about maybe a more traditional model and we think about more dependent learners, they're passive because they are taking all this information from the teacher who is the expert, the sage on the stage. You've heard that expression. And they've relied too much on just that one person to be the provider of information. Blended learning empowers and engages students to become the owners of their learning. And it's really a total side benefit of this model if this is something that we can continue to move towards. When we're talking about blended learning here in District 15, we have a lot of resources for teachers and for students. We have job-embedded instructional supports with instructional coaches at schools, and that's going to be expanding next year. We have a commitment to technology devices for students. So the district is going to provide those one-to-one devices for our students. I know our younger students maybe aren't taking them home, but our older students have full access to those. As a team, our instructional technology department will continue to provide tools, training, and support to both teachers and students to help you use and incorporate tools into your teaching. And then we're going to continue to provide professional development for teachers and technology equipment for teachers to use so that they can effectively digitize their teaching environment. You need to remember, when we're always talking about blended learning, we're not just talking about technology tools or tech integration. It's about instruction, but we want to make sure that you're set up and kind of in fertile ground to grow student learning. And we want to make sure that you can do that with high quality tools. So again, if you're in the slide deck and have that open in another tab, don't forget that Dr. Tucker shared a ton of templates as part of her March e-learning day presentation. So if you click this picture here, the blend picture, you're going to find a very large document that she shared. And it's got all sorts of different ideas. I understand that with blended learning, maybe your question at first is, where do I get started? Where can I begin when I'm thinking about blended learning? And this is a great place for you to look and explore to see if there's a template in there that could fit what you're wanting to do. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to take a little bit of a pause. You're going to stop the video and you have a choice of 3 activities. There's an article to read, a video to watch, and then a reflection rubric where you can think back on the year. So you can pick any one of these 3 activities. It'll probably take you about 5 to 7 minutes to do the activities. And then when you're finished, there's a collaboration document. So you can collaborate with other teachers in real time who are participating in this session as well. And if for some reason you're catching this session at a different time of the day or a different day altogether, you can feel free to go ahead and click that collaboration and go ahead and share your opinion and your story as well. So we're going to take a few minutes. We're going to pause this video, and I want you to click over into the slides, and you have choices. You can either read an article, watch a video, or complete a reflection document about some of the things that you've learned this last year. So now that we've taken some time to reflect and think about what we've done in the past and what we're hoping to do in the future, here's just some few ideas to consider. First up, our District 15 instructional framework. How can blended learning support this framework? And one easy way where you can think about it is when we're talking about student agency. So in the middle of that instructional framework, you can see right there about agency, ownership, and identity. So think back to Dr. Hammond's work and how she was speaking about students taking the reins of their own learning to become empowered learners. So we can provide that through blended learning strategies, and this will really support our instructional framework. So that's something to consider that is a positive of blended learning. Step in MEKHITARIAN. This is a book about blended learning that I have in the works cited if you want to check this out, but he defines blended learning as looking like actionable feedback to students. We already work so hard to give students good feedback that's like quality feedback, but it needs to be actionable, and blended learning can support that. We also want to think about effective questioning. A lot of blended learning is built on the idea of constructivism, which, if it's been a minute since you've been in a grad class, it's what we talk about scaffolding, building knowledge on prior learning. So effective questioning in a blended learning environment where your students are building on knowledge on what they already know, that's great blended learning. Student collaboration is another important facet of blended learning, and assessments to gather actionable data. Remember, when we're talking about formative assessment, we need to collect data so that it can inform our practice and what we need to make adjustments for teaching students moving forward. And you can do that through something as simple as a Google form, although many of our tech tools do provide pretty robust data to you when you're using them. And then lastly, highly rigorous learning opportunities is a quality of blended learning. And this is where some of these student choice opportunities, where kids have opportunity in both their process and their product of learning. So something to consider. This has been such a hard year for all of us, and we have to think right now about what is our mindset. I always liked the month of May because it had so much potential. You know, there's definitely a winding down. Things are moving towards the end of the school year, but it's also an opportunity where we could try out a few things and kind of gather all of the thoughts from the last year and try and figure out what's the best we can take out of that. Remember our Venn diagram. What are our best in-person instruction strategies? What are our best remote instruction strategies? And how can we bring those together for blended learning? So May is a month of potential where you can consider, here's just something I just want to give it a try. I want to go into one of these templates from Dr. Tucker's templates and just try out this one thing, this one rotation, for example, and see if this can work out. And you really need to think about, even though we're stressed and it's been a difficult year, what is our mindset so that we can continually improve as both educators and people? Lastly, in conclusion, I really just don't want any of us to lose any ground. This has been a very challenging time, but we've learned so much and we've seen so much growth from teachers here in this district and in all of our schools. And we really need to think about what we can do to build on the experiences we've had in the last year. Next school year, 21-22, is a huge opportunity for growth, not just for us as teachers and for us as staff members and for us as learners and people, but also for our students. Like there's such potential in next year, and we cannot lose ground on all the hard work that we've done over this past year. We've struggled and worked and learned, and we really need to build on that to have an amazing school year next year. I hope these resources were helpful to you, and please remember that you can always access this at any time. I have also included a link to some resources from Wakelet, which is a nice way to collect resources, and it's down in the works cited slides. So if you want to go back and consider some of these things or do one of the other activities, you can always go check them out there. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope that you're going to consider how you can incorporate blended learning into your teaching practice.